proceed is not passed and agreed to.
Mr. President,
Majority Leader.
I now ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to a period of morning business for debate only for 2 hours. That Senator Sessions control the first hour, Senator Conrad control the second hour.
Is there objection? Without objection.
Mr. President.
Senator from Alabama.
Mr. President, I thank the Majority Leader for allowing us to have a few remarks at this time after the process has been completed tonight. The Senate has not fulfilled its responsibility. On the United States Code that we passed, Congress passed, requires that there be a budget. It requires that Congress commence marking up a budget in the Budget Committee, as the presiding officer knows, by April 1st, and a concurrent resolution be passed by April 15th, setting forth what the Congress authorizes to be spent in the next year. And if anybody attempts to spend above that amount, the Budget Act allows a point of order to be raised, and it would require 60 votes to go above that level. So a budget says what we want to spend and makes it difficult for anybody to spend more. It's what we do in our households. It's what our cities and counties do. It's what our state governments do. I know Senator Manchin, the presiding officer, the governor, he had to deal with his tough budget situations. My governor, Governor Riley, just announced he's prorating 15% of the discretionary spending for the rest of the year. We're not talking about those kind of cuts this year in Washington. I was in Estonia, up near the Soviet Union on the Baltic Sea, and the proud Estonians had a larger deficit, larger economic decline than we did, and the Estonians told us that every cabinet official took a 40% pay cut, every employee took 10 to 20. The health system, one said, my wife's a doctor, she's very unhappy, but they intend to complete the recovery in Estonia without adding to the debt at all. Their debt to GDP is 7%. We will, by September 30th of this year, our debt to gross domestic product will total 100%. And according to the Rogoff-Reinhardt study, and the great authoritative study that has gained a great deal of applause, when your GDP, the debt amounts to 90% of GDP, economic growth declines by 1%. And 1% decline in GDP, experts tell us, is the equivalent of 1 million jobs. So we would be in a position where, because of the debt we've accumulated, the economy will grow 1% less, and we could have 1 million less jobs. We don't know what our economic growth might be. It looks like it could be less than 2%. We're talking about a huge difference in what our economic growth could be this year. Maybe it will be 3, but if it's 3, it would have been 4. If it was 4, it would have been 5. If it's 3, it could have been, it would be 2 because of this debt. So these are the circumstances that we're dealing with. Every witness has told us we need to do something about it, and the nation is in a most serious fix. So there has been a decision made by the leadership of the Senate, the Democratic leadership of the Senate, not to produce a budget. It was interesting when the President's budget was brought up, every single member of the Senate, Republicans and Democrats, voted no. Well, you could say, why did they do that? Well, the President's budget deserved not a single vote. In considering the severe, serious financial condition we are in, the President's budget was the most irresponsible budget I think ever been presented to Congress. It's stunningly short of anything necessary. Erskine Bowles, the man whom President Obama appointed to head the Fiscal Commission, said that the President's budget was nowhere close to where they will have to go to avoid our fiscal nightmare. Nowhere close. But our colleagues, what have they done? They complain about the Ryan budget. They vote against their own, and they vote against any other budget. And they vote against the Ryan budget, saying that it's going to eliminate your Social Security. And you won't receive, Medicare. You won't receive your Medicare because of Paul Ryan and the mean Republicans. But the Ryan budget made no change in Medicare in the 10 years in the Ryan plan at all, except cancel the President's health care bill and save hundreds of billions of dollars. What it did was to propose in the future that we develop a new way of administering Medicare that would save money and make it more responsible to individual needs. We refuse to even move to that legislation to discuss it and to analyze whether or not it should be done that way or whether it could be done another way. But nobody denies that this budget, that any budget that we pass must confront our entitlement programs. Surely they don't. So, but whenever you do, you're attacked by it. And our majority leader, who I admire and enjoy working with, was quite frank. He said it would be foolish for us to pass a budget. He didn't mean it would be foolish for America. He didn't mean it would be foolish for the public interest. He didn't mean it would be foolish in terms of containing the reckless spending and the dangerous path we're on. He meant it would be foolish politically because he had a plan, and the plan was to attack the people who had the courage, the gumption, and the hard work to produce a budget dealing with the long-term fiscal challenges of America. Paul Ryan and his budget committee wants to attack them, bring up their budget, and vote it down and not produce anything in response. And I really believe that's an embarrassment to the Senate. It's an utter failure to meet our statutory obligation. More important, it's a failure to meet our moral obligation. Many have said, well, we need to do something because we're putting debt on our children and grandchildren, and that's absolutely true. But we've been told by numerous experts, including Mr. Bowles, who chaired the Debt Commission, that we could be facing a debt crisis in 2 years, give or take a little bit. That was his opinion. His co-chairman, Alan Simpson, said it could be 1 year. So we could have another debt financial crisis that could put us back into a recession as a result of our fiscal irresponsibility as soon as 2 years, according to Erskine Bowles. Accomplished businessman, successful businessman, President Clinton's chief of staff, chosen by President Obama to head the commission. That's what he told us in the Budget Committee just a few weeks ago. How serious is it? Well, our highway spending this year is about $40 billion. Last year, this country spent in interest on our debt $200+ billion, 5 times the highway bill, just for example. And we need to do something about our infrastructure and highways in America. I'm really worried about it. I see the majority leader, if he would like to...
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
I appreciate
I would yield to him if he
I
had some
would ask
remarks at this time. I know he has many things on his agenda.
Thank you, Senator. Majority Leader, please.
Keep us all under control.
I appreciate Mr. President very much, my friend, yielding to me. He's even though, as I've said this on the floor on a number of occasions, we have on occasion some political differences. No one has been more generous and kind in their statements about me over the years than my friend from Alabama, and I appreciate very much his yielding to me. I ask unanimous consent that mandatory quorum under Rule 22 be waived, and that a cloture vote on the motion to concur in the House amendment to S 990 with an amendment occur at 10 a.m. tomorrow morning, May 26th, without intervening action or debate. Further, that if cloture is invoked, the time post-cloture be counted from 1 a.m. Tonight, Thursday, May 26th.
Without objection.
So in short, Mr. President, we don't have to have the vote at 1 o'clock. Everyone's been most cooperative to get us past that point. We'll come in tomorrow. We hope early in the day to have good news how we're going to move forward to make hopefully virtually everybody happy. And again, I want the record not to appear interrupted, so my friend, the ranking member of the Budget Committee, can finish his statement.
Mr. President.
Senator from Alabama.
It's no easy job being Majority Leader, and I respect the challenges that Senator Reid faces and enjoy working with him. But we disagree about this budget matter. I indicated that, just for example, the highway budget's about $40 billion. A federal Department of Education is about $70 billion. But we spent last year in interest payment on the debt that we've accumulated over $200 billion. Now, the President submitted his budget. It was favorably commented on by Democratic colleagues and represented what appears to be, I guess, the mainstream Democratic view, although I'm pleased to see nobody voted for it. But according to the Congressional Budget Office, which has analyzed the budget the President submitted to us, it would result in an interest payment in the 10th year of $940 billion. That is an amount of money that exceeds our imagining. It's larger than the Defense Department budget. It's larger than Medicare. It's larger than Medicaid. It's the fastest growing item in our entire budget, and that assumes slightly increased but modest interest rates below the 66% historical average. So if interest rates were to go up faster, and that's quite possible, instead of $940 billion, we could have trillion-dollar-plus interest payments every year, crowding out the ability of the Education Department, the Transportation Department, the NOAA, the EPA, and every other agency in government that gets funds. We just would crowd out that spending by placing an annual burden on our people of $940 billion a year. It's this trend, this path that is unsustainable. And we've been told that. And I just want to repeat and make clear what happened just a few moments ago. What happened? 4 votes were brought up by the majority, and they were brought up with the full knowledge that nothing would happen. There was a couple of hours of debate, several hours of debate. We voted on then 4 tremendously important items, 4 budgets for the United States of America, with no real ability to discuss each one of them in any depth at all. It was a political exercise. The majority leader said it would be foolish for us to pass a budget. In other words, it's foolish for us, the Democratic majority, to commit ourselves to any plan for the future of America. That's what it was, an avoidance of responsibility. They wouldn't even vote for the President's budget, because if they voted for it, they'd be responsible for it. What they did was attack the one group of people who've done the right thing, the responsible thing, and that is to produce a historic budget that will basically solve our debt problems. It didn't overreach, and this is the House budget. It was long-term, short-term, dealt with entitlements and discretionary spending and taxes. It was a thoughtful, important, historic budget that the Chicago Tribune praised, the Wall Street Journal praised. The Debt Commission Chairman, the Fiscal Commission Chairman, Bowles and Simpson, praised it for its courage, its integrity, its lack of gimmicks, and being honest. And you know what they said? They said again that anyone who opposes the Ryan budget or opposes any one of the budgets, if you don't like it, you should put forth your plan. And so has our leadership in the Senate done that? Have they proposed any plan? In a shocking display of irresponsibility, I don't have words to describe the degree of irresponsibility I think has been shown here tonight. They have said, we're not going to produce anything. We're just going to attack what you've done. Many of our colleagues have said we've got to deal with entitlements and confront the surging debt that's caused thereby, that Medicare and Social Security are endangered. They could go belly up. We've got to change what we're doing. The House wrestled with that. It wasn't within that 10-year window. It was everybody that's 55 and above and everybody that was on Medicare today would have no change. None. Yet we have people going around and telling our seniors that this Ryan House budget would change their Social Security and they wouldn't get it. In fact, it would save the Social Security program, put it on a sound basis, and it guarantees that people now receiving it and people over 55 who would soon to be receiving it would have no change whatsoever. In fact, in some ways it was strengthened for them. So this is not correct. It's not correct. Well, did we have a better plan? What about the Becerra rule? I suppose that's Congressman Javier Becerra, who served on the Fiscal Commission. They named that for Democratic Congressman from Los Angeles. Did they produce anything they think is better? They have any plan that changes the debt course we're on? Zero. Nada. I really believe that this is not the responsible way to deal with the challenges this country has faced. I'm deeply disappointed. The matter is not going away. As ranking Republican on the Budget Committee, I feel a great sense of responsibility and that to defend the legally required processes of a budget act. I mean, how good, what kind of ranking member or member of the Budget Committee would I be if I sit by and acknowledge and accept these 4 votes as somehow disposing of the situation? What should happen? What should have happened is by April 1st, the chairman of the Budget Committee, Senator Conrad, with whom I enjoyed working this year, he should have produced the chairman's mark. And it should have gone to the Budget Committee as the Act requires, and we would have had an opportunity to amend it and vote on those amendments and debate the budget and discuss all the issues relevant to getting our country on a fine, sound fiscal path. But I think the majority leader decided that was not a good path. Senator Conrad, if you read the newspapers, apparently brought up his budget, his proposal, to the Democratic conference. It received a chilly reception, according to the newspapers. Senator Conrad has said repeatedly he knows we're on an unsustainable path. Once he said we're heading to the wall at warp speed. We've got to change, he said. We're on an unsustainable path. But they thought, I suppose, he was too frugal. And so apparently, according to the papers, he came back the next week with a budget that Senator Sanders and some of the others apparently blessed. And we thought then we were going to have a markup maybe. And he would bring that budget forward. And they've said publicly, well, we've got a budget. We've basically agreed on a budget, but we're just not bringing it forward. But it should have been brought forward to the committee, marked up in committee, passed out of committee, and come to the floor. Say, well, it won't pass the committee. What do you mean it won't pass the committee? We've got to pass a budget. You know, the Budget Act provides it can't be filibustered. It allows a budget to be passed with a simple majority. The Democrats have a majority in the committee. They could pass their own budget, just like they like it. Whatever they like, they had the votes to pass. Why not? Well, I think it's because they thought it would be foolish politically. Foolish for them to commit themselves to any plan that dealt with taxes, that dealt with spending, that dealt with the debt. They didn't want to commit themselves. They decided that the smart thing to do would be to attack the foolish Republicans who actually had the responsibility and the integrity and the sense of duty to lay out a plan for this country's financial future. Now, make no mistake about it. A budget is a serious matter. It sets forth your vision for America, how big you'd like the government to be, how much taxes you want to impose, how much spending you want to incur, how much debt you'd like to incur. And it sets forth before the whole world. And we were waiting to see. The House had done their duty. What will the Senate do? Nothing. So I don't think that's responsible. I don't believe it's acceptable. I don't accept it. I'm going to continue to resist this kind of no-action policy, and I hope that the American people will register their complaint and concern with their constituents and demand that this Senate do its duty to set forth a budget that can help contain spending in America and put us on a path to financial stability and allow our economy to begin to grow at a robust rate. Because I do truly believe the debt and the interest we pay is weakening our economy, as the expert economists have told us. So, Mr. President, we can't quit now. We're not going to quit now. We're going to keep pushing for the kind of budget that will allow us to put this country on a sound path. And I'm deeply disappointed that we've totally shortcutted the entire process. We've entirely avoided the responsibility of casting serious votes on a budget, bringing one up where we have the opportunity to amend it. People can debate it and calculate it out and study and make sure that there are no gimmicks in there and hidden manipulations that hide the way the numbers appear. We've seen that too often. In fact, if the American people knew the extent to which this Congress, year after year, has manipulated the numbers to hide the serious, irresponsible spending programs that we're executing, they would be more angry with us than they are. And 70% of the Americans think this country is on the wrong track. And fundamentally, I believe that's based on the fact that they think we're spending recklessly, running up too much debt, and endangering the future health and welfare of generations to come. I would thank the Chair, Mr. President, and note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Akaka.
I now ask unanimous consent this Armed Service Committee be discharged from proceeding further with SRES Con 13.
The clerk will report.
Senate Concurrent Resolution 13, honoring the service and sacrifice of members of the United States Armed Forces who are serving in or have served in Operation Enduring Freedom, Operation Iraqi Freedom, and Operation New Dawn.
Without objection, the committee is discharged and the Senate will proceed to the measure.
I ask unanimous consent the concurrent resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, the motion to reconsider be laid on the table. And I further ask that all senators be listed as co-sponsors of this resolution.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that the appointment to desks appear separately in the record as if made by the chair.
Without objection.
At the end of this day, Mr. President, it's a pleasure for me to ask unanimous consent that when we complete our business today, it adjourn until 9:30 a.m. tomorrow, May 26th. Following the prayer and the pledge, adjourned proceedings be approved to date. Morning hour be deemed expired. The time for the two leaders be reserved for use later in the day. Following any leader remarks, the Senate resume consideration of the motion to concur in the House message to accompany S-990, the legislative vehicle for the Patriot Act extension, with the time until 10 a.m. equally divided and controlled between the two leaders of the designees. So, Mr. President, there will be a closure vote on motion to concur with respect to Patriot Act around 10 a.m. tomorrow. We're working on a final agreement. A lot of progress has been made in that regard, and there likely will be more roll call votes tomorrow in relation to amendments to the Patriot Act. So if there's no further business come before the Senate, Mr. President, before we terminate here tonight, there is some additional business. I ask unanimous consent that the filing deadline for second-degree amendments be at 9:40 a.m. tomorrow morning.
Without objection.
If there's no further business come before the Senate, I ask that adjourn under the previous order.
The Senate stands adjourned until 9:30 a.m. tomorrow.
The Senate has just gavelled out, but earlier today, members held 4 procedural votes related to 2012 budget proposals.